Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to your World's Pop TV session. My name is Alicia, and I will be your facilitator today covering the topic of global education. We're going to want to explore some general concepts about global education, such as values that are necessary to advance a culture of peace, as well as think through some challenges to that type of education. You're certainly welcome to provide comments and questions within our chat area or after watching our sessions. We'd love to hear from you at any time, either through the POP portal at eotopop.net, eotopop.net, or on our main website, which is also linked through the portal. With all that said, let's first start off our session defining global education, so we know what we're working with. Overall, the best explanation that I've come across that I believe really gives a full definition of global education comes from the Global Education Network, also known as GLEN. The definition that GLEN breaks down for global education goes from a broad perspective to then a more narrow explanation. So it covers the full gamut of what global education is about. Some of the things that they mention are that global education is about understanding universal values in the world and the way that those values can be used by citizens to create change in the world. And universal values include things like tolerance, solidarity, justice, equality, cooperation, inclusion, and nonviolence. So global education then has a focus on what we can do as global citizens to change our world and how it's important to seek to do that as individuals. Global education is also very much about the process of which such awareness raising takes place for individuals. And it starts by expanding your individual knowledge that then eventually leads to perception change and then taking action on issues that require the help of all of us as global citizens to solve. This is really important to understand about global education because it's both a concept and a process. And it's through that that we can then start to make connections from the personal to the global. We have been talking about poverty as a part of this year's POP theme. Global education then helps us understand how broad-reaching issues like poverty can be individually addressed, yet systemically approached. Let's talk a bit about the global education goal in terms of the SDGs, otherwise known as the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the same thing as Agenda 2030 and some of its background. So in the context of the SDGs, global education has its own goal, SDG 4, which is what we're covering for the next couple of weeks, and also what we're talking about today. So it's a good idea to understand how the UN sees its role in providing global education. The reason why we're looking at the UN is because that's the foremost organization that combines all of the thoughts and resolutions that come from many states around the globe. In 2012, the UN Secretary General of that time, who was Ban Ki-moon, launched the Education First initiative. So His Excellency was quoted at the time in the UN News as saying that Education First seeks to answer the call of parents everywhere for their schooling children deserve from the earliest years to adulthood. The initiative was launched at the time with 1.5 billion US dollars allocated to it, and it was emphasized as education that would be both transformative to help students bridge gaps in skills and also the use of technology as well as creating awareness and capabilities to create more tolerant and peaceful societies. This is actually important because peace at that point is then recognized as an essential value within global education. This type of initiative coming out of the UN signifies that there's a global agreement among UN member states that global education is a collective responsibility for our shared humanity to thrive. The UN even has a dedicated special envoy for global education that stresses the need for financing global education for what they call the learning generation. So that's really interesting because what they are really pushing forward is that we all need to be of a mindset to raise a generation of people who are going to be solving the world's most complex problems in ways that will benefit everybody, because we know for sure that it just is not working very well. In previous sessions, Julieta went over the MPI, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, and we know that there's just too many people in the world that are suffering from some level of poverty, and that cannot end up well for any of us. So, how successful is this initiative? Well, there's a report on the initiative that you can find on UNESCO's homepage, and that's the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and they deal with education specifically. That covers the period from 2012, when the initiative started, up till 2016. And the report reveals quite a number of things, but I'm just going to give you some highlights so you have an understanding of how things are going. So the first thing is that the initiative involves institutions as well as organizations that work to provide the type of education where students learn how to be good stewards of our shared humanity. They also enforce a global education that has helped close gender gaps in schools, since the emphasis with global education is that we need each other. We need all types of genders to help us solve the world's issues together. Also, they've seen some increase in enrollment of primary school children and access to secondary school education, which is really important. But they have experienced some difficulties. Certainly an initiative of that caliber and of that reach is going to experience some challenges. And the biggest thing that they are experiencing is a decreased funding and a shortage of qualified teachers. So all of this puts hundreds of millions of children at risk. Because, by the way, the Education for All initiative, most of what you can read about it seems to center around children, but I argue that that's not where we stop. So to give you an idea of what the funding gap is, the need is about 26 billion US dollars per year. So remember, a while ago, I stated that the initiative started out with 1.5 billion US dollars pledged. So that means it already started off with a bit of a deficit, but in order for it to keep moving forward, there has to be some ways to close the gaps for the funding that's needed. All of this means that the work for global education cannot solely be in the hands of traditional educational paths from primary school through post-secondary school. While it's certainly important to start with children, we absolutely cannot forget adults. And this is where higher education for global citizenship becomes really important to support. You might be wondering, well, okay, why? What's the big deal? If adults can't seem to get it right, why don't we just start all over with the children? Well, one reason is because adults raise children. The first education a child receives is at home, and children also don't learn in a vacuum. None of us really do. So the adults surrounding children need to be just as familiar with global citizenship. Another reason is that adults need to be equipped so that they can become the qualified professionals that can fill some of those shortages that I talked about a little while ago with the Global Education Initiative, what they're experiencing. So I'd really like to challenge you to think about another reason why this is important to have global education uh, for adults. Why it's important to learn global citizenship, but also to maintain it. You're welcome with your thoughts at any time. Today, I just want to say that we're not operating from inside our normal webinar atmosphere, but we are live on YouTube. So either way, if you want to send us a comment on YouTube, or you prefer to send us a comment privately, that's totally fine. You're welcome, as I've said before, at any time. Alrighty, so now we've established a case for higher education, and it's focused on global education. So we need to talk about and examine some examples of institutions where people like you and me, where we can go to learn some of the methodology that upholds global education. So when I talk about methodology, this is really sort of the theories and the professional practice piece. This is more geared toward people who are interested in entering a field as a professional. But this is also something that we can explore, which I do have an example, for people who are not necessarily interested in getting a graduate degree, um, or any sort of higher education degree or professional certificate. It should be equally important that education is available for everyone, and that's one of the reasons why we have the POP program, to help people to think and live with some of the tools that we're able to present and resources that we're able to connect you with on how to really impact a cultural piece from the inside out. Certainly there's lots of things for peace and conflict resolution and things of that nature that are out there with many other types of organizations. And those are important, but it's also important for people to connect values, and know how it pertains to them just on a day-to-day basis. Not everyone is a professor or aspiring professor. Not everybody is an engineer, but even if you are, you need to know how to really incorporate these values in your personal life and branch out in the professional realm as well. Okay, so the first example that I have for you, so by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. I only picked a few choice universities. And that was because when I was looking at what they at least described their programs as, I was really trying to see if this was incorporated in the way that the institution really, of the values of the institution. So each institution certainly is for the advancement of the world in general, but it's through pockets of information and majors, if you will. And what I found really interesting before I dive into some of the examples is that I couldn't find anything for undergraduates, which was really interesting. If you guys have any ideas about undergraduate studies that really are geared toward some of the values, whether it be democracy or peace building, um, or sustainable development, things like that, social activism or community organizing, please let me know. We'd love to share that information as well. So, like I said, I couldn't find anything from the undergraduate level. And so that left me with masters and very few doctorate. But that's also indicative of something that we've heard, at least out of Yoda World, time and time again when we talk to different activists, that there's this elitism that seems to be surrounding some of these very values that we are looking to push forward in the world, to have better access for people and close inequality gaps. it cannot be that things become so centered in education that it becomes inaccessible for the average person. And that would, and inadvertently things can happen that way because people push towards the existing institutions. But we have to remember, as activists and as advocates for all of these values, that the traditional institutions, the framework for it is already faulty. A lot of institutions are, for example, stemmed in the structures of supremacy values, whether it be white supremacy or it be some sort of exceptionalism ideal, where it's pandered toward Western views. And that becomes problematic when that is the underpinning of talking about things like human rights. Because then what happens is it colors some of what human rights becomes, and who it's for, and it can feel very much distant for the very people it's actually meant to empower. Alrighty. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Feel free to jump in at any time regarding that. We always love to have conversations on the back end, and we have quite a few, so that's pretty cool. The first example I have is the University College of London. So UCL, can check them out on their website. They have a master's in social justice and education. And I thought that was pretty cool. It's a degree that examines the effects of political and social factors on citizenship and social inequality. The college states directly on their website, I'm going to quote them here, that they, meaning students, will also be able to develop, extend, and reflect on their own professional interests, concerns, and practice, and how to address pressing issues of social justice in their everyday professional and personal lives. We talked a bit about that already and how important that is. And then it also goes on to say, through their engagement with cutting edge research in this area, they will learn tools for fighting for social justice, and transformation in the educational areas relevant for them. So it seems like this curriculum allows for a general basis of understanding about social justice and how it works as a tool within education, but also gives some leeway for people to carve their own way for the things that already interest them and hopefully they're already active in. So the next university that I want to give you was the University of Edinburgh, and that's in Scotland, so that's still a part of the UK. And they have a Master's of Science degree as well as professional certification in social justice and community action. And this was really interesting for me because the program itself is held online. I tried to find a mix of traditional brick and mortar schools and online, and then I wanted to find something that had a bit of both, so that you can get a sense of what's out there. The program's held online. It combines social justice research with policy writing and grassroots organization. And they say that it's supposed to help students challenge and connect and support ideas of things like citizenship, democracy, liberty, which is, wow, I have not seen that referenced anywhere in any of the research that I did. So that's really pretty impressive, depending on how deep they dive into it, and equality in global as well as local contexts. So this here gives you a good sense, it seems, of not only the social justice push, but how to actually make social justice change in terms of policy. That's a level that not many people have access to. So to have a formal education curriculum that teaches you policy writing is really important. A lot of people are excellent in doing grassroots organizing, and that's so important. But you also need that next tier of advocacy, where you're effectively being able to write the policies so that you don't have to necessarily, if you're not interested in being the stereotypical activists, which I say stereotypical because those are people who are shown with bullhorns, and that's important. It's important for you to be at rallies. It's important for you to protest. But a lot of activism is really the quiet grit work behind the scenes, anywhere from data analysis to some of the research that can go on, and you can tailor it to different strengths that you have. And policy writing is one of those ways that you can do that. So that's really cool that this university provides that. So for another example, I'm going to go in another direction, and this is the University for Peace. So UPeace for short. They're located in Costa Rica, and they've actually branched out, because when I first found out about them years ago, they were just a traditional brick and mortar school. They have a few courses online, but it was more like to get you interested, I guess, to follow up with having formal educational training with UPeace. And so now they branched out, and they have the brick and mortar school in Costa Rica, but then they also now have the online learning programs where you can get a full degree online, as well as some professional certificates. So that's really cool. And they're a school that focuses entirely on peace, but the intersections that cross with peace. So for example, it'll be peace and gender, peace and sustainable development, peace and international law, or peace and human rights, something of that nature. You're welcome to check them out at their website as well. And the school focuses on master's and doctoral degrees, which is very cool. I don't really see many doctoral social justice directions happening. So that's one option. And it certainly works with a culture of peace, which I'm sure you'll learn a lot about there. They were definitely involved in that, and the push for the training for it. And it's really important because the culture of peace overlaps with all of these things that we're talking about. It fits in perfectly with sustainable development goals, aka Agenda 2030. It fits in perfectly with the goals that preceded the sustainable development goals, which was the Millennium Development Goals. So it's important that we examine how the intersections of these things can really weave together in education, in formal education, in ways that you can then apply to a career. Okay. So the first three that I gave you are traditional programs. You need to figure out some kind of way to to attend the university. You have to fund it. You may or may not have grants, and so on and so forth. But I also thought it would be beneficial to cover at least an instance of free education. And there is one for higher education that I did find, and it's specifically linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's called the SDG Academy. It's entirely online. And what's impressive about it is that it's free entirely, it's self-paced, and it's graduate level courses surrounding sustainable development. The courses link directly to each of the SDGs, so it explores different aspects of the SDGs in terms of topics. And you can choose a course based on the topic that you want to gain more knowledge about without having an extensive program to undergo for long periods of time. Some people aren't interested in getting a master's degree in sustainable agriculture. Some people, that may not be very helpful for you when you just want to know how to, I don't know, make a better environment in your home. You're not necessarily interested in doing something with land, but if you're a farmer, or you are working on farms or something of that nature, or you want to look at how you can help expand agricultural initiatives that make sense for impending climate change symptoms that we're going to be feeling, that we're already feeling, then yeah, that might make sense. But for other people, maybe you're just a little curious. You just want to have some tools under your belt. This is where you can go and you can learn at your own pace, and you can always go back to it, which is really cool because it's online. So, are there any institutions that support the context of the SDG, of what we're talking about in terms of education for all, that you would add to this list? I'd be curious to know if you know, like I said before, of any in undergraduate institutions, but also any initiatives that involve the concepts that involve education for all. Be really interesting to see that. Next week, our topic will actually be exploring informal education, so that's also important. Education for all needs to definitely incorporate the formal education as well as informal education. A lot of the person-to-person stuff that that really matters, the soft skills. All right, so let's move on to some challenges that educators face, because as you can probably imagine, there are quite a bit of challenges. I want to talk about just some major challenges to think through critically about them, and to just really leave you with that, to just really think about how this initiative can move forward in ways that are creative, because that's what it's going to take. In the end, um, we're all responsible for this planet, and some people make it easier to work with than others. Clearly, that's just the nature of having dialogue. But we need to consistently try, and it needs to be a value that everyone shares across the world, to consistently try, because we only have one planet, and we just got to make it work. When you think of the language surrounding SDG 4, which is the Education for All initiative, the purpose of the education is so that it's supposed to be a lifelong process for all peoples. This is one of the reasons why I stressed before that it cannot just be regulated to children. It also had to be for adults. Yet there are some major challenges that educators face, that I'd really like you to consider. So the first one is lack of funding. So this is a significant issue. It's part of what was identified earlier when I talked about the Global Education Initiative and the experiences that they were having with the shortage of 26 billion per year. Governments have to consciously choose to support and fund global education as a priority. Putting agreements down on paper is one thing, but actions really speak louder than words. So if educators are to be supported, the funding has to be there for the incentives to teach. Now, I'm talking in the sense of educators as in terms of filling the gaps for these professional, well-trained, qualified people that would be teaching in schools. But it's also important for the civil society structure, with making sure that you're supporting as a government the work that is being done by organizations, NGOs, as well as other types of groups, because not all groups turn out to be NGOs. And I'm from the United States, and so we have a structure here with what's called 501c3 organizations, but there's other types of organizations and groups. For example, Yoda World, we're fiscally sponsored, which basically means we are able to concentrate on the work that needs to be done without worrying about the administrative restrictions and filings, deadlines that are really supposed to be for 501c3s, and we are able to do that because our fiscal sponsor is a 501c3. So it helps us be able to still do things like collect donations, and the donations can be tax deductible for people, because with fiscally sponsored organizations, it has to be by law routed through donations, have to be routed through the actual fiscal sponsor, and they in turn are responsible to make sure that we are on target, spending responsibly, doing what we're supposed to do. So it's an extra layer of protecting donors and the public, and making sure that people aren't just getting money from people and misusing things and not really having any level of public benefit. The second thing that's a major issue that educators would likely face is social isolation. I wonder if you've noticed that global education values are talked about often as something for children. I've mentioned this before, but I don't know if you've actually really noticed it. For me, I've noticed it, and I find it very odd, because we don't learn in vacuums, like I was saying before. So if we know that we don't learn in vacuums, that we learn from everything and everyone around us to some degree, why would we only want to focus the values that we want to see in the world with children? And one of the things that I learned many years ago, I was doing a mentor training for at-risk youth. And one of the things that has stuck with me ever since then, this is very many years ago, one of the things that stuck with me was the saying that children do as you do, not as you say do. And it's so true. It doesn't matter. You can tell a child, oh, be nice. But if you're around, if the child is around adults and they see consistently that adults are being mean, then why would you expect them to be anything different? Children learn through other people, environments. So it's true that children need to be taught about global education values, bar none. But without equal emphasis on the fact that global education is a life learning process, the true impact of such teachings is really lost. This actually brings to mind a saying that we have in the United States. I don't, well, in English, not, which English is not particular to the United States. But what I was trying to say is that we have a saying in English that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I'm not sure what the equivalent is in other languages, but please feel free to let me know. I always find that really fun to figure out how to say things in other languages. But it's this idea that adults, older people, in particular, older adults, cannot learn anything new, or that they can't unlearn things that they find at their core. And that's, I mean, I guess it works as a saying sometimes, just to emphasize your personal point. But really, that's self-serving, because it actually doesn't make any sense. If we were incapable of learning, we would be incapable of adapting at some point. And when you cannot adapt, you actually die. And I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but certainly, certainly, as long as you have brain capacity, and as long as you are experiencing, you're learning. Now, whether you're consciously learning or not, that's another story, but it serves to reason that it's important to incorporate adults, so that it's not just isolated to children. And the benefits of cross generational and intergenerational learning, I think, is a value that people can forget. I know for a couple of years ago, it was sort of like the catchphrase of the day, intergenerational. And and then it worked well for, I guess, for conferences and things like that. But really, can you dive deeper and understand what intergenerational education in this sense for values really work, because it's not just about older people imparting on younger people, because young people have things to teach older people too, and they have to be willing to listen. So that issue about social isolation and breaking through that, if you're an educator and you're interested in trying to get some intergenerational conversations going, you might run up against that, where people might think, this is really for kids. I kind of got it together. All right, so another one that I want to leave you with thinking about is the environment. So let's be frank about this. Concepts of global education can unfortunately be tailored to the subjective whims of politics. And this creates some restrictions in what educators can formally teach in classrooms at times. So, for example, democracy and peace and human rights, they're all important concepts in global education. But conversations and actions through government politics can also derail those types of concepts when they're used as political footballs, so that the gain is for one particular country or party more so than another. And political games really make for slow progress. Certainly, we're experiencing a number of those issues in the United States, where I'm from. I'm sure other places in the world struggle with some level of that as well, but particularly the instance of democracy, where the ideas and values of democracy and the respect for the rule of law, not just within one country, but also the international rule of law, it becomes really important to have that as a foundation that all politicians are aware of. And so this is even more important for underscoring why education for all, global education, needs to be embedded, not just in children, but in adults, because the adults are the ones that are already in many places running the world. Now, we definitely have youth that step into positions. There are plenty of situations for a number of reasons where youth and countries are leading very significant positions. In the United States, it's kind of like the anomaly. we don't. It seems like the United States is really into sort of the older generation taking things. So we have things like you can't be below a certain age to hold certain positions, and so you have to think about that. What does that mean? It can mean that that people who are younger than that just sort of don't have it together, don't have the capabilities. Personally, I think that sells us short as a nation. Because it's incredible what youth do worldwide. The statistics are there. It's not like it's not measured, but the enforcement with the support and the cultural values that are underpinned with the education, that becomes really important. And that's how you get those different cultural shifts. It's in the education. It's in the reinforcements of the governments that support the education, not just with lip service, but with the funding. So we have to really make some choices in some of our governments. So certainly the people in general have spoken out and want peace. People want peace. They want to live their lives. They want to go to work, come home, spend time with family. They want to have a decent place to live. They want to have adequate, nutritious food to eat that is consistently available to them. They want to have clean drinking water. These things sound like, well, duh, bar none. But yet we struggle with these things in the world because of things like multinational corporations that are more interested in getting profit, not really thinking through what the harm is done to the environment. And nobody's money in the end can save us or them from the consequences that we will continue to feel from things like climate change. We can't get out our fresh water supply back. So the things that we can drink and the inventions that are made to thankfully turn water in some spaces that are not very clean into clean drinking water, that's helpful, but we need to solve the problems at the root. And so while civil society has been tremendous in helping try to alleviate some of the problems, it's really just trying to shave off some of the surface things that we see. And it's really the governments working together, supporting the general international agendas, um, as well as the civil society sectors that helps the community come to grips with what needs to be done on a local and even individual level that can really move the dial forward. So I will leave you with that. And as we move forward in discussing Goal 4 more of Agenda 2030 in the coming weeks, I challenge you to think about how you have incorporated global education values in your life. Why or why not? Remember, those values include things like tolerance and democracy, inclusion, diversity, solidarity, peace. I actually extend that to a culture of peace because most people think of peace as just settling conflicts or physical conflicts like wars. And certainly through the POP program, we talk a lot about what it means to have the culture of peace. Um, so check us out more on the POP portal about that so you can get more information and join our network. But what are some of the things that you notice in your life? Can you pinpoint them? And if you can't, why not start today? Thank you so much for your time today. And we'll see you next week, Thursday, at the same time, 1500 UTC. If you're in Eastern Standard Time like me, that's 10 a.m. For our session where we'll be talking about community experiences with informal education. Thanks so much, and I hope that you take the time to share this session and previous sessions with friends, family, students even, and we'll see you next week. Bye.